The story of House Targaryen begins here. Actually, it really starts over here. Well, maybe it even started all the way over here, but we'll begin with Valyria. 5 to 8,000 years before Game of Thrones begins, Valyria obtained dragons, and began to rise in power. Some say the dragons came from Asshai, while others think they were in Valyria to begin with. First, they went north to the old empire of Gis. After a series of wars that devastated the people who did not ride dragons, the Valyrian freehold grew larger, and adopted the Giscari's favorite pastime, slavery. The Valyrians spread further west and turned the conquered people into slaves, who went down into the mines beneath the 14 flames in Valyria, and typically found a few pieces of precious metal before dying of heatstroke or being eaten by a fireworm. About 1,000 years before the main story, Valyria conquered the Rhoynar, and all the people who didn't get cooked by the dragons went to Dorne with Princess Nymeria. They conquered all of western Essos but stopped at the Narrow Sea, refusing to conquer the dozens of small petty kingdoms of Westeros. No one knows why, but some people blame it on a prophecy that the gold of Casterly Rock would bring the downfall of Valyria. Others say the Valyrians did go west, but experienced some great tragedy that made them shun Westeros forever after. The Valyrian freehold was run not by a single emperor, but by archons representing the dozens of dragon-riding families, of which the Targaryens were somewhere in the middle. About 600 years before Game of Thrones, they established an outpost in the Narrow Sea called Dragonstone. 200 years after that, Aenys Targaryen had a dragon dream about the doom of Valyria, so the Targaryens left and looked really smart when the doom happened 12 years later, in 102 BC. The next 100 years are called the Century of Blood. During the Bleeding Years, House Targaryen mostly kept to themselves while the newly free cities of Essos competed to see who could take the freehold's place. Volantis was doing a good job until everyone rebelled, so Pentos and Tyrosh asked the last remaining dragon lords to step in. A young Aegon the Conqueror flew Balerion the Black Dread to Lys, and burned down a bunch of Volantene ships. Aegon married his older sister Visenya because he had to, and then married his younger sister Rhaenys because he wanted to, and then had a dragon dream about some sort of threat to humanity. This inspired him to conquer Westeros.
It's free real estate.
The conquest was pretty simple and only lasted about 3 years. Turns out becoming the king of millions of people across a continent roughly the size of South America is kind of easy when you have 3 dragons. Although Dorne resisted Aegon because they simply refused to fight dragons with spears. When Aegon defeated House Durrandon, he let his best friend and probably half-brother, Orys Baratheon, take the Stormlands. So assuming Orys was Aerion's bastard son, that's how House Baratheon started out with a drop of dragon blood. Aegon built a really crappy fort creatively named the Aegon Fort, but the population grew so high that he needed an actual capital city, King's Landing. Aegon had 2 sons, one from each wife, but there's a conspiracy theory that neither are actually his. Aenys was small and kind, while Maegor was big and kind of an ass. When their dad died, a bunch of rebellions arose to challenge Aenys. He did nothing, while Maegor did burning, and the rebellions stopped. Aenys wanted his 2 kids, Aegon and Rhaena, to get married, but people hated incest for some reason, and started a rebellion for that too. Aenys died from stress, so Maegor usurped the throne from his nephew and ruled Westeros for 6 years and 66 days. Most of his reign was about fighting the religious zealots who hated incest and polygamy, both of which Maegor really enjoyed. Maegor had a total of 6 wives, none of which bore him a healthy child, probably due to his 3rd wife, a sorceress, poisoning the other wives. Maegor's 5th wife was his niece, and her brother Jaehaerys opposed Maegor, and Maegor died right after that, mysteriously impaled on the Iron Throne. Jaehaerys and his sister Alysanne ruled for 55 years, and had 13 children. 9 of the 13 lived to adulthood, but all his sons died early, so Jaehaerys had to choose between misogyny or letting a woman rule Westeros. He was so stumped that he called a great council and let the lords decide to crown Viserys, his grandson, and then old Jaehaerys promptly died 2 years later. Jaehaerys and Alysanne did a lot for Westeros, like building some roads and giving more land to the Night's Watch. Jaehaerys also passed the doctrine of exceptionalism, which essentially stated that Targaryens are above any laws of the faith, and they can do whatever they want. Incest mainly. Viserys was nice, but also dumb. He had a daughter from his first wife, who he married when she was 11, and 3 sons from his second wife. The daughter and sons fought each other for the Iron Throne after Viserys croaked. If you don't want the rest of House of the Dragon spoiled, skip to this timestamp. The Targaryen dragons died, and no one really won, but technically Aegon II won for a minute until he was poisoned, and then Rhaenyra's son Aegon III became king. Aegon III was the saddest boy of all time because of watching his entire family kill each other, but his reign was peaceful. His son Daeron's was not. He tried to finish what Aegon the Conqueror started in Dorne, and the Dornish killed him. Baelor the Blessed was mostly harmless, but also very stupid. His refusal to have sex with his sister meant that she instead had sex with their cousin, and gave birth to Daemon Blackfyre. Oops. Baelor's uncle Viserys was king for only a year, so who cares? His son was Aegon the Unworthy, whose list of bad decisions is greater than his stomach. He ruled for 12 years until he got so fat he couldn't walk, but as a parting gift to the world, he legitimized all his many bastards. This meant his son Daeron II was rivaled by his bastard son, Daemon Blackfyre. They did a war, and Daeron beat Daemon largely thanks to Bloodraven, who put some weirwood arrows into Daemon Blackfyre and his 2 sons. Daeron II was a great king, whose marriage alliances brought Dorne into the 7 kingdoms. His son Baelor Breakspear was also super great, but we can't have 2 great kings in a row, so Baelor and his sons died early, and the throne passed to Daeron's brother, Aerys I. Aerys was weird, and let Bloodraven run the realm while the 2nd and 3rd Blackfyre rebellions happened, both of which were handled once more by Bloodraven. Aerys read about prophecies for 12 years and seemingly had 0 sex, so the throne passed to his younger brother, Maegor, who died 12 years into his reign after being crushed by a rock. Maegor's sons all had dragon dreams, and the dreams killed them. Aemon was a maester, but served his brother Daeron on Dragonstone until Daeron died of an STI. His other brother Aerion Brightflame drank wildfire, and thus ended his life prematurely. So when King Maegor died, they had another great council. The obvious choice was his youngest son Aegon, but he spent his youth traveling Westeros with a hedge knight called Dunk, and Aeg learned all these crazy ideas about respecting small folk. Aemon recused himself to the Night's Watch, so Aeg became King Aegon V, and he sent Bloodraven packing to the wall with Maester Aemon because he murdered another Blackfyre he promised not to murder. Of course, we meet Maester Aemon in Game of Thrones, who lives to the ripe young age of 102. But Bloodraven is actually still alive as well, at 125 years old. He became Lord Commander of the Night's Watch, until he disappeared and became the last Greenseer, the old man in a tree who Bran Stark meets. So Bran is learning weirwood magic from one of Jon and Dany's ancestors. For some reason, this detail wasn't included in Game of Thrones. Neither was any of this.
I kind of forgot about.
Aegon was king for 26 years, most of which were peaceful, except for the 4th Blackfyre Rebellion. Aegon wanted to help the small folk, but his greedy lords said no, so Aegon decided he needed dragons to force the lords to obey him. This resulted in the tragedy of Summerhall, when Aegon V and lots of his family died in a dragon hatching attempt. But his son Jaehaerys didn't die, so he became king and had to deal with the 5th and final Blackfyre Rebellion. This one was ended by Barristan Selmy, who killed Meleys the Monstrous. Jaehaerys was told by a witch that the prince that was promised would be born of his children's line, so he forced Aerys and Rhaella to get married, even though they didn't really like each other. Aerys became the most insane king in Targaryen history, threatening to destroy King's Landing with wildfire. But he and Rhaella did make Rhaegar and Daenerys. Rhaegar was born at Summerhall, and is probably Jon Snow's father. And lots of people think Jon is the prince that was promised. And Daenerys could be too. Maester Aemon thought so, and the Red Priests of R'hllor think so as well. There's also Aegon, Rhaegar's son, who the Mountain was thought to have killed, but there might have been a baby swap. He invades Westeros with the Golden Company, takes Storm's End, and will probably become king before Dany arrives. That will be revealed in The Winds of Winter, release date to be decided. So if George Martin ever finishes the books, we'll find out which Targaryen is the prince that was promised. The fulfillment of a recurring dream amongst Targaryens, going all the way back to Aegon the Conqueror. Or, more likely, it won't be that simple, and neither Jon nor Dany will be pure heroes that save the world and are beloved by everyone. Okay, please like and subscribe for more videos, please. Goodbye.